A sentence that shook the very foundation of British justice has now sparked an eruption from the heart of Westminster. Karma, silent for far too long, has finally reacted. But no one expected the fury he unleashed. His reaction wasn't calculated or restrained. It was explosive, rattling Parliament, the media, and even his own party. The Lucy Connolly scandal, once dismissed as a fringe controversy, has now ignited a full-scale political inferno. As Starmer's rage echoed through the chambers of power, Richard Tice wasted no time striking back with a vengeance that could mark a turning point in British political history. A tweet, a conviction, and a prison sentence that felt more like a warning than a verdict thrust Lucy Connolly, a name few had heard before, into the spotlight. Her crime, a tweet labeled as hate speech, was followed by swift and severe punishment, over 2.5 years behind bars. The justice system moved with a speed and force that left many speechless. But the silence didn't last long. Reform. UK's Richard Tice took center stage, declaring Lucy Britain's first modern political prisoner. He demanded answers, action, and accountability. The public, divided at first, began to ask the same question. Was this justice or political vengeance? The background comma, the man at the helm of the Labour Party, remained eerily quiet. His statements were brief, his presence distant. For many, it seemed like he was hoping the storm would pass. But it didn't. The outrage grew louder, the protest grew bigger, and the media turned up the heat. Under that pressure, Starmer cracked, not with an apology, but with fury. In a fiery closed-door meeting, leaks revealed he was livid. He didn't just defend the sentence, he condemned those questioning it. According to sources inside the Labour leadership, Starmer called the backlash a dangerous campaign undermining the rule of law and lashed out at Reform UK for playing politics with criminal justice. This internal fury soon spilled into the public sphere. During a tense press briefing, Starmer made what's being called his most aggressive statement to date. He warned that the UK would not tolerate mass extremism hiding behind freedom of speech. His tone was cold, sharp, and unapologetic. He doubled down on the legitimacy of Lucy's sentence, insisting that the justice system had acted independently and appropriately. But what shocked many was what he didn't say. There was no mention of the troubling reports about Lucy's treatment in prison, no acknowledgement of the growing public unrest, and no empathy, just unwavering support for the punishment, which many now see as disproportionate and politically motivated. Then came Richard Tice, loud, clear, and relentless. Standing before a wall of microphones, he launched a scathing counterattack. Starmer isn't defending justice, he said. He's defending control. He's defending fear. Tice accused the Labour leader of orchestrating a cover-up, of deliberately ignoring Lucy's suffering, and of turning the legal system into a political weapon. He claimed that Starmer's sudden fury was not a show of strength, but of panic. Panic over losing the moral argument, panic over being exposed, and panic over a system beginning to fracture under the weight of its own contradictions. Tice's words struck a nerve. Social media exploded, and thousands rallied around Lucy Connolly's name once again. The phrase political torture began trending. Legal experts entered the debate, questioning the speed and secrecy surrounding Lucy's trial and imprisonment. Some began to wonder if her sentence was meant not just to punish, but to send a message, one of fear, silence, and submission. While Starmer stood firm in public, the cracks in his party began to show. MPs who had once supported him started whispering their concerns. Advisors grew uneasy, and the press began digging deeper. Every time Starmer tried to bury the story, it grew louder. Behind the scenes, Labour insiders reportedly pleaded with him to soften his tone and show some humanity, but he refused. In his mind, any show of sympathy could be spun as weakness, so he stayed the course, unrelenting and unbending. But in doing so, he may have miscalculated. Because what he saw as firmness, the public began to see as coldness. What he framed as justice, more and more people began calling revenge. The battle lines are now clearer than ever. On one side, a government defending a harsh sentence in the name of order and law. On the other, a political force rising fast, fueled by outrage, dissent, and a growing belief that something fundamental is being lost in the country: freedom, fairness, and the right to speak. At the center of it all stands Lucy Connolly, locked away, silenced, and now a symbol of a nation at war with its own values. The aftermath of Keir Starmer's eruption over the Lucy Connolly case sent immediate tremors across Westminster. Far from calming the storm, his aggressive tone only deepened the divide. News outlets scrambled to capture reactions from all sides. Labour frontbenchers, caught off guard by the sheer intensity of Starmer's outburst, struggled to stay on message. Some attempted to echo his words about the rule of law. The dangers of hate speech were acknowledged by some, but others appeared visibly uncomfortable. The message from the top was clear. There would be no compromise, no review, and certainly no empathy extended to Lucy Connolly. Yet the public mood had begun to shift, and not in Starmer's favor. Across the UK, questions multiplied. Was this really about hate speech, or was it about sending a message to critics? If the punishment truly fit the crime, why did the government refuse to address the conditions of Lucy's imprisonment? Allegations began circulating that she was being held in near isolation, subjected to psychological pressure, denied basic communication with her family, and moved between prison blocks without explanation. These details, though initially brushed aside as speculation, began to find traction as prison reform advocates and whistleblowers hinted that her treatment was far from standard. Starmer remained silent on these specific allegations, offering no clarification, no denial, and certainly no accountability. Richard Tice, sensing an opportunity to expose the growing fractures within the political elite, took his campaign to the next level. Under the growing momentum of the Lucy Connolly case, he began calling for an emergency parliamentary inquiry, not just into the sentencing, but into the broader handling of freedom of expression in the UK. He questioned how many more citizens had faced disproportionate consequences for expressing unpopular or controversial views. He drew comparisons to repressive regimes and asked the uncomfortable question many were thinking, but afraid to say aloud, has the UK crossed a line? And the public began to listen. Rallies in support of Lucy grew larger and more organized. Protesters gathered outside courts, government offices, and even the BBC, accusing the mainstream media of suppressing coverage of Lucy's story. Online forums became hotbeds of debate, with tens of thousands engaging in discussions about censorship, political intimidation, and judicial overreach. The government's position, once seen as a principled stand, now looked increasingly brittle under the weight of scrutiny. Inside the Labour Party, discontent grew. MPs privately complained that Starmer's handling of the case was damaging the party's image. They were beginning to fear that Labour was becoming synonymous with authoritarianism. Some even suggested that Starmer's legal background had blinded him to the political consequences of backing such a harsh sentence without nuance or compassion. Still, few dared to speak out publicly, wary of reprisal or being labeled as sympathetic to hate speech. But the silence was telling and damaging. Meanwhile, Ty continued to dominate headlines. Interview after interview drove his message deeper into the public consciousness. He portrayed Lucy Connolly not just as a political prisoner, but as the victim of a broken system that punishes dissent while ignoring deeper institutional failures. He accused Starmer of being more concerned with appearances than justice. "You can't govern a country through fear and expect loyalty in return," he said. The message resonated, especially among younger voters and working-class citizens who felt increasingly alienated by the tone of political discourse. The phrase two-tier justice became a rallying cry. Ty and others began highlighting other recent cases, some involving violent crimes that resulted in far more lenient sentences. The comparisons were jarring. In one particularly viral example, a man convicted of assault received a suspended sentence, while Lucy, for a tweet, was locked away for over 2 years. The injustice wasn't just perceived, it was felt. And as the pressure grew, even some in the media who had previously dismissed the controversy began to take notice. Editorials shifted tone. Commentators began asking difficult questions. The tide slowly but surely was turning. Despite this, Starmer refused to budge. In a subsequent speech, he doubled down yet again, stating that freedom of expression must always be balanced against public safety and social harmony. He insisted that Lucy's case had gone through the proper legal channels and that political interference would set a dangerous precedent. But each time he spoke, the disconnect became clearer. While Starmer spoke of legal frameworks and abstract principles, the public was talking about fairness, empathy, and the human cost of political decisions. And that's when new information emerged that further complicated the picture. A leaked report from inside Lucy's prison detailed her deteriorating health. It spoke of extended periods of isolation, a lack of mental health support, and staff being instructed to avoid discussing her case. The report didn't confirm outright abuse, but it painted a bleak picture of neglect and indifference. Starmer's camp issued no comment, and Labor's communications team began refusing interviews on the subject altogether. Sensing an opportunity, Tice struck again. In a rally outside the Home Office, he raised the stakes further, accusing the government of violating basic human rights. If they can silence Lucy, they can silence you, he warned the crowd. This isn't just about her. It's about whether we still live in a democracy or in something darker. His words drew thunderous applause. The energy in the crowd was unmistakable. This wasn't just politics anymore. It had become a movement. And as Tice's campaign gained momentum, Starmer found himself increasingly isolated. Once seen as the steady hand Labour needed to challenge the Tories, he now looked out of touch, rigid, and politically vulnerable. He had gambled that taking a hardline stance would win him praise for leadership. Instead, it opened a chasm between him and the people he claimed to represent. While his defenders insisted he was protecting the rule of law, the narrative that had taken root in the public mind was far more damning: that he was using the law as a shield to hide political misjudgment and moral blindness. Inside the Conservative Party, some began to seize the opportunity to paint Starmer as the face of authoritarianism. Ministers who had previously kept their distance from the Lucy Connolly story now started making quiet statements in support of reviewing hate speech laws. It wasn't out of principle, it was political strategy. They saw what Starmer didn't, that the public's patience had worn thin. And this case had touched a nerve that couldn't be ignored. Lucy's name, once barely known, was now etched in national discourse, not as a criminal, but as a warning, a symbol, a mirror reflecting the state of modern British politics. What began as a single tweet had grown into something uncontainable. The more Starmer resisted, the more people began to question whether justice still meant the same thing in the United Kingdom. As the Lucy Connolly scandal spiraled further into the national spotlight, its influence began to stretch well beyond Westminster. What had started as a controversial tweet and an aggressive sentence had now evolved into a deepening crisis that exposed the fragility of Britain's institutions. In every corner of the media, from late-night talk shows to viral TikTok videos, the same question echoed louder and louder. Is this still justice, or is it control disguised as law? And while Starmer continued his unwavering public stance, behind the closed doors of Labour HQ, panic had begun to seep in. Advisors who had once stood firmly behind his decisions were now split. Some urged him to hold the line, fearing any reversal would appear weak. Others warned that continuing down this path would cost the party public trust, particularly among younger voters and civil libertarians. Meanwhile, Richard Tice was thriving in this chaos. What began as a pointed criticism had transformed into a full-blown political offensive. Each day, he appeared sharper, more determined, and far more prepared than the established parties had anticipated. His media campaign intensified, now supported by a team of legal analysts, civil rights experts, and former judges who questioned not just Lucy's sentence, but the system that allowed it. Tice's message had evolved. This wasn't just about one woman. This was about reclaiming civil liberties in a democracy under siege, and his audience grew. Tens of thousands tuned into his speeches. Petitions surged past 250,000 signatures. Hashtags like #Lucy's Law and Justice for Speech dominated platforms like X, Instagram, and Facebook. Under this rising pressure, Starmer attempted to regain control through a televised address. Framed not as an apology but as a call for national unity against rising extremism, he claimed the backlash was being driven by misinformation, fringe political actors, and social media hysteria. With a stern expression, he doubled down yet again, stating that no responsible leader can condone speech that incites hatred, regardless of the personal consequences. But the impact of his words fell flat. The British public wasn't looking for legal justifications. They were looking for humanity. And it was precisely the emotional disconnect that was beginning to define Starmer's leadership in this crisis. Compounding the crisis further was the emergence of internal leaks from within the prison service. Documents and testimony surfaced, showing that Lucy Connolly had, in fact, been moved into solitary confinement more than once, despite no violent behavior on record. One prison officer anonymously revealed that the move had been unusual, adding that she was treated differently from day one. Other reports highlighted the lack of mental health support offered to her, a reality made worse by the intensity of her public vilification and sudden notoriety. These revelations only added fuel to the fire, further eroding public trust in the government's handling of the case. The situation ignited fury across social media. Users began comparing Lucy's treatment to that of actual violent criminals who received lighter, more lenient sentences. It was a scandal that no longer fit neatly into party lines. It had become a national reckoning. Within Parliament, tensions reached a boiling point. Backbench MPs from both Labour and the Conservatives started breaking ranks, demanding a formal inquiry into Lucy's trial, sentencing, and imprisonment conditions. Some called for the judiciary to be re-examined, while others focused on reforming hate speech legislation. A few more cautiously suggested that perhaps this case had crossed a moral line. Despite these murmurs of rebellion, Starmer held firm in public, making only minor shifts in tone. But political analysts warned that his refusal to adapt might soon backfire catastrophically. Richard Tice, now fully aware of the momentum he had built, escalated his efforts. He organized a mass march through London, drawing supporters from across the political spectrum. The turnout stunned the political class, with estimates placing the crowd at over 100,000. Former police officers, journalists, and even some ex-Labour donors marched alongside ordinary citizens carrying signs that read, "Thoughts aren't crimes, justice not vengeance, and who's next?" The energy was palpable. This wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about identity, liberty, and a rising belief that something fundamental was being lost in British society. The Labour leadership, rattled by the size and passion of the protests, scrambled to manage the fallout. Spokespersons were ordered to avoid mentioning Lucy Connolly by name. MPs were instructed to stick to vague messaging about maintaining social harmony and resisting division. But these scripted statements only fueled more criticism. Even former Labour allies in the press started publishing op-eds questioning the wisdom of Starmer's rigid approach. One headline in The Guardian read, "In defending the system, Starmer is forgetting the people." Meanwhile, Tice was everywhere. Radio, television, podcasts, independent channels, and each time he drove home, the same point. This isn't about left or right. It's about right and wrong. International media began to pick up the story. Outlets in Europe and the US reported on Lucy's imprisonment with headlines questioning the UK's commitment to free speech. Human rights organizations issued formal statements requesting a review of the case. Amnesty International demanded a response from the British government regarding Lucy's prison conditions. And yet, the silence from Downing Street was deafening. No comment, no response, no shift in tone. Starmer's camp seemed to believe that ignoring the global outcry would make it fade, but the opposite happened. The UK was now under a microscope. Starmer's approval ratings began to drop. Focus groups reported a growing unease about his leadership style, describing him as cold, authoritarian, and emotionless. For a man once praised for his measured, legalistic approach, these traits now felt like liabilities. His opponents painted him as disconnected from the struggles of ordinary people. His allies feared they were watching a slow political implosion unfold in real time. Through all of this, Lucy Connolly remained behind bars. Her legal team filed an appeal, citing disproportionate sentencing and mistreatment. Tice helped fundraise for her legal fees and promised to pursue the case to the very end. Meanwhile, support for the Lucy Bill surged, with calls growing louder for Parliament to pass protections ensuring no citizen could be imprisoned for expressing views, even unpopular ones, without overwhelming justification. The ground beneath Westminster was shifting. The political elite, long accustomed to managing public outrage with media narratives and party discipline, now faced something far more powerful: an organic, unpredictable wave of dissent. It wasn't confined to one ideology or one demographic. It came from parents, students, professionals, retirees, from people who had never marched or spoken out before but who now saw themselves in Lucy's fate. And as that wave grew stronger, one truth became increasingly unavoidable. Keir Starmer had misjudged the moment. In his quest to appear strong, he had failed to appear human. In his desire to defend the rule of law, he had forgotten the people that law was meant to serve. Now, with a nation watching and a movement rising, the question loomed large. How long could he hold the line before it finally broke? If you're as shocked by this as we are, don't stay silent. Share this video now to spread the truth before it's buried. Subscribe to the channel for more breaking updates the mainstream media won't show you. Hit the like button if you believe Lucy Connolly deserves justice and comment below. Do you think Starmer has gone too far? Your voice matters now more than ever. Join the conversation and stand up for real democracy. The movement surrounding Lucy Connolly showed no signs of slowing. As appeals progressed through the courts, public rallies turned into organized campaigns, town hall meetings, and community-led discussions on civil liberties. Schools and universities began hosting open forums about freedom of speech, digital expression, and the role of government oversight in an increasingly connected society. Legal scholars debated the implications of the case on national and international stages. It was no longer just about one woman's tweet. It was about the direction of a modern democracy. Richard Tice, now seen by many as a central figure in a civil rights revival, used the growing momentum to introduce a new charter, a free expression guarantee that aimed to limit the government's ability to criminalize nonviolent speech. He proposed safeguards for digital communication, transparency in hate speech prosecutions, and an independent body to review political speech cases. His proposal sparked heated debate in Parliament. Some praised it as visionary, while others warned it could erode protections for minority groups. But what no one could deny was that Tice had shifted the conversation, and with it, the political landscape. Meanwhile, the Labour Party faced internal upheaval. Senior MPs called for an emergency leadership meeting to reassess strategy. Memos revealed a growing number of disillusioned Labour members threatening to defect if Starmer refused to show flexibility or compassion. Grassroots organizers within the party, once loyal to Starmer's moderate image, were now questioning whether he had lost touch with the values that brought them into politics in the first place. The fear inside Labour HQ was no longer just about electoral damage. It was about a deeper ideological fracture that risked splitting the party in two. Amid this chaos, Keir Starmer remained publicly stoic but privately embattled. Advisors reportedly urged him to make a conciliatory gesture, perhaps a moderated statement acknowledging the complexity of the Lucy Connolly case or a pledge to review current sentencing practices. But Starmer refused. In his view, any retreat would undermine the rule of law and embolden what he called reactionary populism. Yet that very rigidity, once considered a strength, was now becoming a political liability. Internationally, the UK's reputation began to suffer. Editorials in the New York Times, Le Monde, and Der Spiegel questioned whether Britain, long seen as a bastion of liberal democracy, was losing its moral authority. Human rights groups from across the globe called for independent observers to review Lucy's case and monitor conditions inside British prisons. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of the Right to Freedom of Opinion and Expression issued a formal statement expressing concern. Foreign governments began citing the Connolly case in their own critiques of Western hypocrisy on human rights. Back in the UK, the media that once echoed official narratives began pivoting. Documentaries were commissioned. Investigative reporters dug deeper into not just Lucy's trial, but similar cases quietly resolved under equally murky circumstances. Calls flooded into talk radio. Opinion columns across the political spectrum began to align on one uncomfortable truth. Whether or not Lucy Connolly had crossed a line, the response to her had been disproportionate, politicized, and fundamentally un-British. And still, Lucy remained imprisoned, cut off from the world, her voice filtered through brief legal statements and secondhand accounts. Yet she had become the most unlikely symbol of democratic resistance in modern British history. Her name appeared in graffiti, across London projected onto government buildings, turned into slogans on protest signs and digital avatars. Songs were written, art was created. For a generation that had grown disillusioned with politics, Lucy Connolly was no longer just a person. She was a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked. The government now faced a choice: continue down a path of silence and suppression, risking further erosion of public trust, or open the gates to a difficult, honest reckoning. And with elections looming on the horizon, the stakes had never been higher. Politicians on both sides began to ask themselves the question the public had been asking for months: what kind of country jails people for speech? In the end, history will judge not only what happened to Lucy Connolly, but how Britain responded.